拜拜喽。
On tonight's episode of Temur Gear, I crash a reasonably priced mare into the Khan's yurt.
Oh, fucking horse cop.
Jagatai Mei gets arrested for tax evasion.
No, mate, didn't realize I had to pay taxes on that yurt.
And Rinchambol Hammond gets beaten up by a woman in trousers.
I don't like the way that lady's looking at me. Welcome back to the Weird Medieval Guys podcast. I'm Olivia, and this is Aaron, my great Khan.
Ah, welcome to my hall.
You mean your yurt?
I'm a great Khan. I have a hall and a yurt.
Oh, I assumed you were, like, out on a hunting trip right now.
No, I've come here to podcast. Oh. You think I'm going to podcast in a yurt? The acoustics... Actually, you know what? No, I think the acoustics in a yurt would be great.
Yeah, definitely get, like, a little bit of, like, rustling wind.
So that's right, Olivia. And I, in preparation for this episode, one of the pieces of research that I did was I did some thinking about modern things that a 13th century Mongol warrior would get really into. Right, because we're going to talk about a lot of cultural differences between the Mongols and sedentary societies. Here's my analysis of what shit that I think a Mongol warrior would love.
Those bars where you can do axe throwing.
Yes. Okay, well, that's on the list already. First off, this one is self-explanatory. NASCAR.
Yeah!
Big thing go very fast in a very impressive way.
I mean, I've said it before, I'll say it again. The car is the horse of modernity.
No, I'll tell you the horse of the modernity. This is the next one, motorbikes.
Oh yeah, BMX. Yeah.
This next one is hashtag van life. Again, self-explanatory.
Maybe.
Then we
I
have,
feel like they would be more hashtag glamping.
There's an overlap between glamping and hashtag van life.
Yeah, maybe.
Then we have barbecue.
Yep.
All variations.
Yes.
Texan,
Indeed.
Korean, they'd be all over it. Music festivals.
Yep.
You get a bunch of tents in a field. And to observe some sort of great cultural event.
Yep.
Speaking of, the Olympics.
Yes.
They love great feats of strength.
Yes. Yeah.
Then this one, my brain expanded 3 inches when I thought of this. Asian fusion restaurants.
100%. Or just like those really, like, westernized Chinese restaurants. I don't know if people refer to those as Asian fusion, but like, they would love like a Panda Express buffet.
Well, let me. I've got good news for you, because the next thing on here is just a name, and that name is Big John.
Yes. Also, can I add one?
What?
XL Bullies.
XL Bullies. I thought about including XL Bullies on the list, so that goes on there. Then this one is a bit rogue, but I think it makes sense if you think about it. The Schengen Zone.
Yeah. No, 100%. 100%.
Free borders, freedom of movement.
Yeah, they would be like, what do you mean? I just have to make sure my products comply with this short list of regulations and labeling standards, and then I can sell them anywhere?
Huzzah! And finally, Labubu's.
I'm interested where you're getting Labubu's from.
Because they're a Chinese product that has been sold, has been a massive success in the West.
Yeah, you know what? That's fair. I can see that.
And I can also imagine a Mongol warrior being like, check out this cool fetish that I found. I'm going to tie this to my saddle.
Yeah, you can imagine, like, you know, in the kind of popular eye, like a Mongol wearing like a sort of belt made of like Labubu heads or something. War trophies. I know they weren't all savages like that, the Mongols, but you know, you could imagine.
That's right. Well, yeah, and I think that the sort of pushing back on perceptions of the Mongols is what we want to do in this episode, because one of the things that I have been sitting on the idea for this episode for about a year and a half. It's just been trying to figure out the angle, because I'm so tired of people saying on Twitter, on Reddit, or whatever, being like, why is it the Mongols managed to, conquer half of Europe and all of Asia, and yet they seem to have almost no cultural legacy? And I'm sick to death of hearing about this. So what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about what we mean when we talk about imperial cultural legacies. We're going to talk about the way that Mongol society was organized, and why the way that Mongol society was organized was sort of precision engineered to not produce any of those things. And then we're going to talk about some of the actual cultural legacies of the Mongol Empire, because the Mongols, and I think not to spoil the thesis of this entire episode, created, admittedly for a sort of short time in world historical terms, but created one of the most cosmopolitan, sophisticated, and like globalized societies in human history, certainly before modernity.
Yes, I'm behind you 100%. And I'm super excited to say that the next episode after this, so it will come out 2 weeks later, is going to be giving you a look sort of from the inside at some of the people that traveled through that globalized cosmopolitan world. So I'm really excited to talk about that as well, but you're going to get some really good setup and some really good history for that here as well. And that will give you all the context you need to know. And also be a wonderful and charming story in and of itself, except for the violent parts, which will be less charming.
Yes. I mean, you can't really... Unfortunately, with the Mongols, you do.
No, I thought we're pushing back on stereotypes.
They do kill some people.
No, they were chill. They weren't like that.
They were mostly chill, and then but then when they did kill people, they killed a lot of people.
Yeah. And when they abducted people, like, you know, they weren't just taking you around the block. They were taking you around the continent.
Yeah, you're like, guess what, motherfucker? You live in Egypt now.
You thought you were
I hope
Hungarian.
you like pyramids and hummus.
Yep.
So, before we get into the Mongols themselves, I want to do a little bit of reflection about this perception of cultural legacy and what we mean when we talk about it. Because I think that we should interrogate this a little bit. I mean, obviously, we live in a world now that is absolutely shaped in very visible and obvious ways by particularly by the European empires of the early modern to the 20th century. But also further back, you know, we still reference things like Rome in terms of architecture, in terms of political language, and also other historical empires like Persia, like the many and various Indian empires.
Yes.
And especially with those modern empires, the cultural legacy is very, very, very obvious. Like, when we were recording this right now, it is the Cricket World Cup on, where the big, like, blockbuster match, again, for a game invented in England, is between India and Pakistan. It's like, I can't possibly imagine how Indian people would have gotten into cricket. Or, like, you know, you see people being like, oh, I'm in Melbourne / Delhi / Vancouver, and all the buildings look British.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly. I mean, we've talked about the Ottomans on this podcast.
Well, the Ottomans are another great example of, like, their touch is just absolutely everywhere.
Yes.
In their former territories, but also empires that lasted until much more recently, like the Soviet Union.
Yes.
Like, the Soviet Union, which created its own kind of visual language that is still, like, deeply, deeply associated with all of the countries that used to be a part of it.
Yes, and that people have very strong relationships with and reactions to.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I've boiled down the way that we kind of associate with historical empires into three core, incredibly reductive ideas, right? The first of these is old buildings. Bluntly, we either preserve the architecture of that empire or we sort of try to emulate it. Things like, you know, the U.S., the entire visual language of the U.S. federal government, which is just like, what if we did Rome but now?
Yes.
Second, which is cultural assimilation. So again, why does everybody in the world fucking speak English? Why does everybody in India and Pakistan love cricket? It's because of cultural transmission, and they got exposed to stuff they wouldn't otherwise have been if they hadn't been colonized. And the last one is about being a universal reference point. So, like, this is more to do with the sort of the older empires than the, like, modern day empires. But something like Rome being a massive source of legitimacy, or the Roman Empire, I should say, being a massive source of legitimacy for just about every single medieval Christian society. The way that, or to take a more kind of immediate example, the very complicated role that the history of the Persian Empire has in modern-day Iran, both the sort of the various Islamic Persian empires, but also the pre-Islamic Persian Empire.
Yes.
Basically, like, referencing those institutions and that empire as a source of legitimacy. And what's interesting about all of those examples that I've just given is that those are things that the Mongols did not give a fuck about, and were not particularly interested in emulating. And the reason for that is because of the very particular kind of society that they were. So let's talk about Mongol society. So the most important thing to understand about the Mongols, when they could sort of come thundering out of the Eurasian steppe and conquer Eastern Europe and China in the 13th century, the fundamentally most important thing, everything that you're going to think and hear and think about the Mongols from this point onwards descends from this basic fact. They are not farmers, they are pastoralists. Their society is organized around nomadic communities that live off of animals that they graze, and every few days when their animals have grazed an area, they will move on. The entirety of Mongol society is based around this. Their diet is primarily derived from the animals that they are milking and ultimately eating. Their houses are not houses, they are yurts, because you have to be able to follow the animals as they graze. I should say the animals in question that sort of Mongol society is based around, there's 5 of them, and I don't know if this is a contemporary term, but certainly now they are referred to as either the 5 snouts or the 5 jewels, which is very endearing.
Aww.
So these are obviously, first of all, horses, but also sheep, goats, camels, and cattle. Everything in Mongol society derives from these animals.
Yes, and believe me, guys, they milk all of them.
Well, here's a great example of how it affects Mongol society. So, European and all sedentary societies in an agricultural kind of pre-modern society where you don't have access to imported food from all over the world, you have to eat what you can grow. That fact affects how those societies fight wars. So Europeans, people in the Middle East, in the Middle Ages, do not fight war at harvest time, because you cannot feed your army otherwise. The Mongols, however, their version of that is the milking season, which is the spring. So they will... one of the reasons why the Chinese and the Europeans and the Middle Easterners struggle so much to fight the Mongols is that the Mongols are at their most powerful in the sort of summer and autumn months, and that's when they will attack at the exact moment when European Chinese armies need to disperse and go back to the farms. But then, in the spring, when Europeans and other sedentary societies are ready to fight war, the Mongols aren't there. They've left. And another thing is, so obviously their war fighting is influenced by the fact that they are pastoralists. Their diet is, I'm going to be honest, is 2 things. It's milk and meat.
Oh, yes.
They loved, obviously the classic Mongol drink was kumiz, which is fermented horse milk.
Yes.
It's apparently very sweet. You can still get it. It's apparently very sweet. It's very low alcohol percentage, but I bet it goes down real nice.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. And yogurt, lots of yogurt.
Yes. I want my dream is to be a European like trader who visits the horde and during some festival and gets to drink like copious flagons of fermented horse milk.
Yeah.
Oh, it'd be so
definitely.
good. Anyway, so that's the basic fact. These people are pastoralists. They have to move around. And so by the time the Mongols are sort of have emerged as like a powerful force in the Central Asian steppe at the start of the 13th century, their society is based around a sort of a central unit, which is the Orda, or the horde. Again, as I've mentioned before, the English word horde is directly derived from the sort of Mongolo-Turkic Ordas.
Yeah, and this is horde with an E on the end, by the way.
Yes.
Not horde spelled H-O-A-R-D.
Yes.
That's different.
So when, again, and I've made this point before, but like when we think of a horde in English, we think of like, we generally think of an army, and they're generally quite unruly.
We think of orcs. We think of like all the orcs
Yes.
from the Lord of the Rings.
A
being
horde of
like,
orcs.
oh, I'm going to stab you with my sword that's actually curved. It's a scimitar.
Yeah. No weird Orientalism going on there. Don't look up the cultures that J.R.R. Tolkien directly compared the orcs to. Anyway, so the Orda, or the hordes, as we'll just call them for convenience, of the Mongols were not armies. They could be organized as armies, but what they really were gigantic mobile cities of thousands of people, most of whom would have been women and children. And there's a great anecdote from the Italian diplomat Plano Carpini, who traveled around the Mongol Empire, that the Orda of a rich Mongol... Hang on, it's been a while since I've done a voice. The Orda of a rich Mongol will look like a large town, and yet there will be very few men in it. Now, if you visited like a Mongol horde when the men were off hunting or fighting, you would just see a bunch of women wearing trousers, just doing everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is a very, very ancient lifestyle as well. I mean, this is the lifestyle that it's believed gave rise to basically every European culture.
Yes.
Ultimately, long before this, of course, but it's something that has been practiced on, the Central Asian steppes for a very, very long time. And these things like, heavy reliance on animals for mobility and heavy reliance on dairy for one's diet are believed to be what was, gave those original Indo-Europeans, as they're called, an edge over all the other guys. And the Mongols have refined it somewhat, but it's still working pretty well for them. If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
100%. So these hordes, they would sort of, what they would do is they would settle in a place for a few days and then travel again. They would follow very defined circuits, so their communities would would know where they were going. Generally, you would head south towards, warmer pastures during the winter, and then north into the mountains when basically everything turns into a gigantic swamp and it becomes interminable to be there and everybody just gets sick.
Yep.
And the movements of these hordes were sufficiently predictable that, generally speaking, wherever a big Mongol horde went, local towns would come out and send all of their artisans and craftsmen to, as I was sort of alluding to, sell their wares.
Yes.
So it was very profitable to have the Mongols in town. And each of these hordes would have been led by a Khan, which could render as king, sort of. Basically, the hereditary leader of the community, who would have his own keshig, or honor guard, who are responsible for kind of carrying out his orders and his will and organizing the horde for war where necessary. And each of these when the Mongol Empire kind of fully establishes itself under Genghis Khan, he divides the empire between his sons, and each part of the empire becomes known as an ulus, or roughly translating to nation. And these had their own elites, their own kind of institutions that ran everything, but it was still within the kind of broader Mongol world. And the ones to keep track of, generally, there are various uluses that rose and fell, but the ones to keep track of are, first of all, the Great Yuan, which is, it's China, basically, after the Mongols conquer it.
Yeah, it's north and west China mostly. Yeah. It's not the far east of China.
No. They never got into that cool bit with all the pointy mountains. But
it's all geographical. It's the steppes, the Chinese steppes.
Yes. And then to the east of them, you had the Chagatayans, who sort of run Siberia until they eventually get sort of absorbed into other communities. Then to the west of them again, you have the Golden Horde, one of the coolest names for a kingdom ever conceived of, and we've made it slightly less cool by explaining what horde means in this context, but it still sounds sick.
Yes.
And south of the Golden Horde is the Ilkhanate, and this is Persia, basically.
Yes.
Persia and its environs. So basically what you should think of is there are different levels of Khans, from like individual hordes all the way up to the Great Khan, who, well, it depends on the Khan. Sometimes they lived in Kambalak, which is the Mongol word for Beijing, essentially. And sometimes they lived in Karakorum, which is the traditional capital of the Mongol Empire that was set up by Genghis Khan. All of these Khans, all the way from the Great Khan down, their legitimacy is based on two things. Number one, it's based on their ability to distribute wealth. A Khan who hoards power and wealth is not going to last very long because of the second thing that Mongol sort of power is based on, which is consensus. And this is one of the really interesting things about Mongol power, is that they're not democratic. I want to preface this by saying this, but within the elite, there was, until the kind of the dying days of the empire when things get a bit more autocratic, there was, every time a sort of a vacancy arose at the top, there was a genuinely competitive election within the golden lineage, or the descendants of Genghis Khan, to decide who the next Khan would be. And this is one of the reasons why Europeans who are fighting the Mongols occasionally, and this happens when the Mongols invade Hungary, are often quite taken aback that the Mongols will be winning a campaign and then suddenly just disappear, turn around and leave. And quite often the reason for that happening is that the Khan has died, they need to choose a new Khan, and that needs to happen at a gigantic conference in person.
A conference?
Yes.
A conference?
Oh, womp, womp, womp. Called the Kurultai. And certainly for at least for the first 100 years of the empire, this seems to have been a genuinely competitive process. And the reason for that, I think, is that it's really important to remember that in Mongol society, if you don't agree with the legitimacy of your ruler, you can just leave. You can pack up everything you own and leave the community and go off and do your own thing. Yes, they might try and come and find you and kill you for revenge and things of that nature. But, it's a very different prospect from, the new guy. There's a new prince in your city and you don't like him.
Well, necessarily, when you control as massive of a tract of land as the Mongols did, you cannot have surveillance everywhere and exercise absolute control over everyone at the same time. So you're asking people basically to make a wager. You can go along with it and do what we say, or, you could rebel, you could walk off, you could do something we don't like, and maybe it would take a few days or a few weeks. We would find out. We would have things to say about it.
Yes.
Maybe we would come find you. Maybe you would get away, but then you're up the creek without a paddle, because then you're just on the run. Yeah. So it's a loose power, but it is, conceals, or it promises the potential for much greater power to come down upon you.
Yes. Basically what it is that the reality is the Khans the Great Khans and all the Khans down from them cannot operate without the support of the Khans beneath them.
Yes. And you have, not only do the Khans distribute power and wealth, but they also accept massive tributes of power and wealth. And so it's a give and take relationship that is seen as symbolic of that buy-in.
Yes.
You give me 50 horses on my birthday, and, I'll give you a new yurt and a new wife on your birthday.
Yeah.
And it's, this form of tribute giving is very important for continually reassuring that those relationships are still in place in absence of a harsh rule of law. Yes.
It is based on circular and, crucially, reciprocal relationships. There's a great anecdote that illustrates this perfectly that's told by Rashid al-Din, about Ogedei Khan. So, one day, when we had laid the foundations of Karakorum, he, as in the Khan, went into the treasury and saw nearly 100,000 bars of silver. "What benefit do we derive from all these stores?" he asked. "They have to be constantly guarded. Have it announced that everybody who wants a bar should come and take one." And so, again, he's literally saying, open up the treasury, let's give people some money. Huzzah! But the point of that is that he's doing that fully on the expectation that that money is going to come back to him eventually.
Yes.
And so the kind of this consensus building, the crucial kind of theatrical, and I do want to emphasize the word theatrical, mechanism by which that happened was at the Kurultai, where the new Khan would be elected and then enthroned. And I'm going to read a little bit from Rashid al-Din about the enthronement of Guyuk Khan, who was one of the early great Khans. After discussion, the princes and begs agreed to enthrone Guyuk. As was customary, he refused and offered the job to every prince, using his illness and weak constitution as an excuse. After the commanders insisted, he said, "I will accept on condition that the emperorship remain among my offspring." All agreed to this and gave written pledges, saying, "So long as there remains of your progeny a piece of flesh a dog wouldn't take if it were wrapped in fat, and a cow wouldn't accept if it were wrapped in grass, we will give the Khanate to no other." Then the shaman's pole was erected, the princes doffed their hats, loosened their belts, and sat Guyuk on the Khan's throne.
Wow.
First of all, very evocative,
Yes.
very theatrical. But, like, the crucial point here is, like, first of all, what that immediately reminds you of, I think, is, like, from Julius Caesar onwards, the sort of the theatrical refusal of absolute power being a crucial part of the legitimization process. Because Rashid al-Din fully is aware of and explicitly points out that this is a theatrical mechanism. But the reason why it's an important theatrical mechanism is he is saying, I am doing this, I'm accepting this power because the great men of the land demand it of me.
Yeah, it's like, at a wedding when they say if anyone has any reason why this couple should not be married, speak now or forever hold your peace, You're not really expected to get up. I mean, you can get up and say something, but that's seen as quite déclassé.
Yes.
Like, presumably any issues that have been had with this arrangement will be worked out in advance.
Yes. Oh, well, and that is exactly what the Kurultai is about. It is, and I'm so happy to be able to use this pun, it is for horse trading. Political, literal and figurative political horse trading. So, we've kind of implied up to this point that Mongol power is quite elastic, it's quite loose, and it's quite consensus-oriented, at least within the elite. But it's very important to note that the actual Mongol state is not fuzzy at all, and it is actually very sophisticated and complicated.
Yes.
And one of the main mechanisms by which that is the case is taxation. So we think of Mongols as raiders. They are not raiders. They are not pirates. They get their money. They get that 100,000 silver bars in taxes, goddammit.
Yes. So, internal and external trade is a huge source of income for the Mongol economy. More on external trade, I would say, in the next episode, but...
A little bit. We'll have a little bit of that.
A little bit here as well. But yes, in general, there's a very well-defined and well-regulated system of taxation and tariffs, down to the percentage. So we have documentation of this. It's not controversial at all. Okay, so this is from the Travels of Marco Polo. More on that again in the next episode. But we have some information from Marco about the Khan's revenue collection system. We shall now speak of the revenue which the Great Khan draws. This is from one particular city within Kinsai and places within its jurisdiction, constituting the 9th division or kingdom of Manji. So we have a very well-regulated, well-defined system of subdivisions of these empires. We're talking about Kublai Khan here in the late 13th century. In the first place, upon salt, the most productive article, he levies a yearly duty of 80 tomans of gold, each toman being 80,000 sagi, and each sagio fully equivalent to a gold florin, and consequently amounting to 6,400,000 ducats. This vast produce is occasioned by the distance of the province to the sea and the number of salt lakes or marshes, in which, during the heat of summer, the water becomes crystallized, and from whence a quantity of salt is taken, sufficient for the supply of 5 of the other divisions of the province. There is here cultivated and manufactured a large quantity of sugar, which pays, as do all other groceries, 3 1/3% in taxes, that is. The same is also levied upon the wine or fermented liquor made of rice. The 12 classes of artisans, of whom we have already spoken, as having each 1,000 shops, and also the merchants, as well as those who import the goods into the city, in the first instance as those who carry them from thence to the interior, or who export them by sea, pay, in like manner, a duty of 3 1/3%. But goods coming by sea from distant countries and regions, such as from India, pay 10%. So likewise all native articles of the country, as cattle, the vegetable produce of the soil, and silk, pay a tax to the king. Yeah, again, very well defined. We have all of these different records of how they have a good handle on what is actually produced in each of these provinces. If your crops fail, apparently you can petition to the Khan and he will exempt you from taxes for that year. This is all supported by a very mobile system of horseback messengers who travel all over the place. And so there is also that extra element of mobility. It's a very interconnected empire internally, and that is used to great effect systematically to, squeeze money from people.
Yeah.
Mongol taxman, he's coming for your horses.
No, absolutely. They had a whole, and you might be saying, oh, well, of course Kublai Khan had this super complicated tax system. He just took over the Chinese bureaucracy. And it's like, there is an element of truth to that China already had a bureaucratic state. But also, the Mongols are doing this in Europe as well. They're doing this everywhere.
Yeah.
And another thing to note is that you mentioned tax exemption. One of the things that is particularly used in the Golden Horde is the liberal distribution of Tarkhan status, which essentially exempted you from, and your institution, from having to pay taxes. This was used a lot of the time to suborn local elites. So the Russian Orthodox Church, for example, benefited enormously from tax exemptions in the Mongol Empire, and this was one of the reasons why we will come to Russia presently, but modern day Russia and Ukraine were integrated quite well as vassal states of the Mongol Empire.
Yes, yeah, we had tax-exempt zones. We had, domestic product protectionism. Yes, it was very economically sophisticated.
There's a sophistication at play here, but another thing that I want to pick up on is predictability. One of the things that, because the Mongols want money to be circulating. This is again returning to the point about give and take in the sort of the subject ruler relationship between the sort of the great Khans and their various subjects. One of the things that I want to the image and the model that you should be using to picture every aspect of Mongol society is circulation, is movement. Things are moving constantly, and the Mongols want to keep, crucially, trade flowing. And what is good for international trade, and any kind of business really, is predictability, and particularly predictability of taxes. You want to know how much you're going to be paying at each stage of your journey if you're going to be, say, exporting a shitload of spices from India to Europe, which you will be if you want to make some money.
Yes, exactly. And you want to be safe while you travel through that land. So this is also why, contrary to the popular, belief that Mongols were just these mad lads who could sweep down from anywhere on horseback and chop your head off.
Although they were also that.
No, I mean, yeah, they were. Well, if you didn't pay your taxes, yeah. And as much as the foreign merchants might have said, these Mongol tariffs are costing me an arm and a leg, they didn't mean it literally. That was just what they were paying in taxes to, bring their woolen fabrics eastwards and whatnot. And so, yes, it's also a remarkably safe time to travel through Central Asia and through all of this sort of steppe territory because, as long as you're paying your taxes, not kicking up a fuss, you're probably going to be fine. Yeah,
and it is very much, and the Khans go out of their way to make it as easy as possible for merchants to ply their trade across Asia. And I think there's a really telling, I think that the Mongol relationship with foreign merchants is really interesting and really instructive. There's another great anecdote, again, about Ogedei Khan. Again, Rashid al-Din, who's a chronicler who ends up in the Mongol court, tells a story about Ogaday's secretaries coming to him and saying, "Sir, all these merchants are coming to you and they're selling you stuff and you're massively overpaying." And Ogaday's response is very straightforward. He says, "Merchants deal with the treasury in the hopes of making a profit." And the point that he's making there is that, like, if people think they can make money with me, dealing with me, they are going to come to me.
Yes. And so the Mongols are very accommodating to foreign traders. They even allow the Genoese and the Venetians to set up colonies in the Black Sea area. So places like Kaffa in Crimea and Tana by the Sea of Azov. Those are outposts that are mostly populated by Europeans and Christians and people who have some connection to the Christian West, or, you know, to lots of other places while they're little cosmopolitan zones. But they are made to be like jumping off points for European merchants to travel and bring their wares, sell their wares in Asia, buy stuff and take it back home, paying taxes at every step of the way.
Yeah, the Mongols don't really engage in maritime trade, but they work very closely with the Genoese. And also, I should say, do you want to know who else the Mongols work very closely with and have a very productive relationship with?
The Persians?
No, they mostly just roll in and just take over Persia. No, I'm talking about the Byzantines.
Oh yeah, the Greeks, yeah.
Because Constantinople controls access to the Bosphorus, and that is the point. You mentioned the sort of the various European colonies in the Black Sea around Crimea. You need to get that shit out of the Black Sea.
Yeah.
You need to go past Constantinople. And so the Byzantines, who again are still like reeling from the Fourth Crusade and having to retake the city of Constantinople, quite happily sign up to be Mongol vassals because it's essentially a life raft for them.
Yeah, exactly. And it makes overland travel and trade very attractive, which is quite unique because in Western Europe, it's, you know, a lot is done by sea and it's seen as quite uneconomical to transport things overland. But over the Mongol steppes, it's actually quite incentivized. And it's, you know, compared to the very long and perilous journey by sea, it's seen as relatively safe. What could go wrong? You could fall over and die randomly, but you were probably going to do that at home if that was going to happen. So
yeah,
just, you know, take some buddies, tell someone where you're going, and we'll see you in a year with some silks.
The other thing that I think that speaks to the like sophistication of Mongol governance is how information is communicated. So Olivia mentioned this sort of postal communications network that the Mongols operate. And I want to dive into a little bit about that before we move on, this is called the YAM system. And this is essentially, it's a network of way stations that are reliably spaced 20 to 40 miles apart from each other, where a traveler can ride in, get a meal and a fresh horse, and keep riding. Now, Olivia, before we move on, does that sound like, as you're a true-blooded, you know, real American girl from the frontier, does that sound like anything?
Yeehaw, that sounds like the Pony Express.
Yes, the Pony Express, which was until the Transcontinental Railroad and the telegraph, was the most sophisticated communications network you could operate over such a large area. The Mongols figured it out hundreds and hundreds of years earlier.
Yes.
So information could travel up to 190 miles a day, which, admittedly, in the space of the Mongol Empire, when you're talking about thousands of miles, doesn't sound that fast. But compared to literally all of the alternatives, it is completely groundbreaking. And obviously, some of the YAM stations are quite nice, some of them are kind of shitty.
Yeah.
But, like, the fact that even existed was remarkable, and it was the only way, basically, that you could possibly hope to govern an area that vast.
Yes. I have a quote, I think, about the whole system.
You know they've made a video game about this.
What?
Yes, they've made a video game where you play as a YAM rider.
I want to play as a horse.
Well, I think you play as the guy and the horse. It looks sick, actually.
I love these quotes from Marco Polo because they're so detailed, and he really gives you a sense of like, I am there, I'm on the steps, I'm waiting for my horse to be brought out, like I'm eating dumplings. It's great. So he says, In this way, just as you have heard, the Great Khan's messengers travel in every direction through all the provinces and kingdoms and other lands under his rule with great convenience and ease, and lodgings and horses await them at every day's stage. This is, without doubt, the greatest glory and the greatest distinction that any emperor has or could ever have, never mind any king or other mortal. For you may take my word for it that more than 200,000 horses are stationed at these posts all across his provinces, purely for the use of his messengers. And let me also tell you that there are more than 10,000 palaces, all furnished as lavishly as I have described. And then this is a great little detail about like how the system works. So he says, between one post and the next, at intervals of 3 miles, there are villages consisting of as many as 40 houses occupied by unmounted couriers who also play a part in the emperor's postal service. I will tell you how. They wear large belts covered all around with bells, so that when they are on the move, they can be heard a long way off. They always run at full tilt, and never for more than 3 miles. And the other couriers who are waiting 3 miles down the road clearly hear them while they are still some way off and stand at the ready. As soon as the first courier arrives, the second takes what he is carrying, along with a little ticket given to him by the clerk, and sets off on the second leg of the 3 miles, at the end of which the handover is repeated. And you can take my word for it that, by means of these couriers, the emperor gets news from places 10 days' journey away in a day and a night. For you should know that these runners cover the distance of a 10-day journey in a day and a night. In 2 days and nights, they bring news from places 20 days' journey away. Blah, blah, blah. And, yeah, he talks about, like, all of these, like, systems they have in place. So, yeah, I guess that's kind of, like, the budget service, is just the guys with bells on their belts.
Well, it's also, it's last mile shipping.
Yeah.
I'm not joking.
No, you're right. You're completely right. That's a really good way of putting it. Yeah. And yeah, it's quite striking that he says that this is the greatest glory that any emperor could have, is the flow of information. So this is something that's highly prized and is a function of having this huge, geographically vast and relatively safe empire. It's pretty amazing for this period of time. It is completely unique.
Absolutely. And I want to return briefly to the kind of the 3 concepts of like of empire, sort of imperial legacy that we mentioned at the start of this episode, and just kind of check them off before we move on. So, like, first of all, old buildings. So as you will have picked up on right now, or by now, the Mongols are not building a lot of cities. They do build cities. This is important. They build Karakorum, which is the old imperial capital. Despite the fact that it is the seat nominally of a continent bestriding empire, it is also kind of small and a bit shitty.
Yep.
So William of Rubik says that, where is he from again?
He is Flemish.
So William of Rubik says, it was smaller than the village of Saint-Denis, and the monastery of Saint-Denis is worth 10 times that price.
Yeah, he's not having a good time in Karakorum.
But he's making a point that is true, which is that it's not a priority.
Well, even like when the emperor is in town, he doesn't stay there. He stays like outside of the town. No,
the point of it is it's a place for Muslim and Chinese traders to stay and interact with each other. And the same is true of Sarai, which is founded by the Khans of the Golden Horde near the Volga River. Like, these are functional places. The Sarai has a sort of a Khan's palace in it, but the Khan is mostly out in the steppe with his horde.
Yes.
Because that's where he wants to be. And also, that's where political power is.
Yes, but while he's gone, there are these reminders of his presence in the form of all of this infrastructure that may be somewhat thinly spread, but is absolutely everywhere.
Yeah.
I mean, it must have just been amazing that wherever you travel, there are these outposts and this system that is just the same when you go thousands and thousands of miles east to west, north to south. There's a guy who will be like, yeah, I'll carry your message for a price.
We take for granted the fact that, to use this, you can drive from Maine to California and there will still be McDonald's when you get there. Like, that is, and even somewhere that's like much more,
That's a really good comparison.
culturally diverse,
Mongols.
like Europe or India. It's like there is a certain level of standardization, and there are certain levels of things that you will come to expect just wherever you are in a given country. That would not have been true for even within most European kingdoms, let alone, again, a multi-continental empire.
No, I mean, as we talked like two episodes ago about, you could go down the road in England and they would be serving you a different kind of beer.
That would make you shit yourself.
One with potentially deleterious effects on your digestive system. And I mean, not everyone who went to the steppe liked fermented mare's milk, but let me tell you, you could get it in Karakoram, you could get it in Tana.
I hate McDonald's, but I do acknowledge that I can get it.
Exactly.
And so, and the other thing about Mongol cities, of course, that's really important, they are built out of mud brick. So, like, they haven't survived well because they're made out of fucking mud brick. So that's it. So old cities, they did not build those, but also why would they? And you can say, oh, what about Kambaluk? It's like, well, that's Beijing. We still have Beijing. Yes.
And, I think, again, the lack of, like, sort of archaeological, not archaeological, but architectural footprint, I think it's a little bit more explained when we read about the festivals and the ceremonies and the things that the Mongols do, because we do hear about these huge tributes, but we hear about horses and even like elephants and trains of camels being given in tribute.
Again, think mobility. Everything's always in motion.
Yes, and we hear about the extravagance of, the food being served. It's very Viking-esque in that way. The copious quantities of food and drink. And so, and we do have, archaeological evidence of like jewelry and gold and riches being, given out and distributed as well and produced within the empire. But the idea of a palace is much more the seat where these exchanges of wealth happen than it is necessarily, something that you pour all of your wealth into.
Absolutely. So that's cities. Tick. Or why aren't there any old Mongol buildings? Okay, check. Cultural assimilation. Why don't we all drink fermented yak's milk?
Oh.
Because the Mongols...
You don't?
Not every day.
I'm going to put this away.
The Mongols did not care about trying to make anybody else Mongol if you were from a sedentary society. So this is really important. So the Mongols were very culturally assimilationist when it came to other steppe peoples. If they defeated another steppe kingdom in battle, like the Karakitai or the Kipchak Turks, what would happen is that those people would basically be, at sword point, forced to split up and join existing Mongol hordes. So there's this enormous sort of churn that happens as the Mongols are expanding in the 13th century, where all of these different peoples are kind of getting introduced to each other and remixed with each other. And that starts the process of ethnogenesis that will lead to a lot of the kind of modern nations of Central Asia that you will have heard of, like Kazakhstan, like Uzbekistan.
Yes, and it's a give and take, because there are Turkic languages, for instance, being like widely spoken, and in fact even used as de facto trade languages all along the Mongol road system. So. Yeah, there is also an element of these people affecting the Mongols. It's very practical.
Absolutely.
It's quite pragmatic.
But if you were living in a city in, say, Persia or Russia or China, so essentially what to the Mongols is the periphery. Like the Mongol world is centered on the steppe, and all the kind of like places where cities are like the edges of the world. That's a really important model to keep in mind. But if you're living in one of these, again, to the Mongols, peripheral cities, they do not give a shit. They want to trade with you. They want to have productive business relationships with you. They want you to not rebel.
Yeah.
But other than that, like, you're sound.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't, I think the ways that some of these places got assimilated into the peripheries of the Mongol Empire could be violent.
Oh, no, they have to be subjugated first.
Yeah, I mean, we hear like stories from, I mean, Eastern Europe, for instance, of like there's a lot of people just getting whisked away. So
no, but they're not rolling up and saying everybody has to speak Mongol now.
no, not at all, not at all.
It's not even, if you compare and contrast to something that we've been thinking about a lot recently, the Norman Conquest, right? The Norman Conquest involved, yes, a military defeat of the English kingdom, but then also a massive multi-generational sort of process of cultural assimilation where the English elite gets fully replaced and sort of the English language gets essentially deposed as the national lingua franca and gets sort of sidelined. Nothing like that happens in like Persia or whatever. And the other thing that's really important to understand about the Mongols, when we say they weren't trying to turn anybody who wasn't already sort of Mongol adjacent into a Mongol, is that they exhibited a genuinely pretty radical level of religious tolerance within their empire. Many the Mongols who of Genghis Khan's time followed they followed something called Tengriism, which even calling it a religion feels like a kind of a misnomer. It is a kind of, I'm struggling to define it because it doesn't really track easily onto Christianity or Islam.
Well, it's animistic. It's not.
That's the word I was specifically trying to avoid.
Well, I think it's helpful for providing a dichotomy between like, animism is a loaded term, but I think it's a good way of describing a religion that is more of a worldview than a doctrine.
Yes, absolutely. And but basically it centers around Tengri, who is the sort of the lord of the great blue sky, essentially. And also Mongols had very specific relationships with and believed that sort of the landscape could affect human affairs. Again, it's saying that they had like, the spirit of the mountain is maybe a little bit of like a mistranslation, but it's like, yes, animism is probably the closest that we're going to get, as loaded a term as that is.
Yeah, sorry.
No, it's fine. I was twisting in the wind trying to think of a better word and couldn't.
Yeah, I mean, that's the problem. I don't think there is a non-loaded word to describe any type of like pre-Abrahamic religion.
Yes.
To be honest. What, like shamanistic? That's probably worse.
Yeah, pagan doesn't feel right either, because it is kind of monotheistic, really.
Yeah.
But also theism doesn't feel right in my mouth.
No, because it's not about like what does God want.
No, it's just this is the way things are.
Yeah, exactly.
But they were completely at peace with not only allowing Muslims, Christians, Buddhists, fucking Hindus within their empire, but allowing those people to proselytize and convert other Mongols.
Yes.
I mean, eventually the Mongols in the west of the Golden Horde and its descendants will end up predominantly Muslim. And one of the interesting things about that process is that for a lot of Mongols, it wasn't a process of conversion as we would think about it. It's simply that they swapped out the word Tengri for Allah.
Yeah.
Allah is simply a new way of thinking about Tengri.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons why, sorry to bring this back to Marco Polo again. I just love Marco Polo. One of the reasons why Marco Polo's dad and his uncle get sent back by Kublai Khan before Marco is in the picture is he's actually, according to the tradition, sending them to the Pope to ask for 100 educated scholars to tell the Khan about Christianity and Western ways of life. So there is also, what develops is a kind of very cosmopolitan curiosity about the world around them and a desire to synthesize in aspects of foreign culture, including religion.
Absolutely, and that is a point that we're going to pick up on in the next episode. So yeah, they're not gonna try and compare and contrast let's say Europeans in the New World, where it's like you need to pick up this cross and tear down your sacrificial pyramids, or we are going to fucking kill you.
Yeah, say you love Jesus to reduce your chance of a violent death by 10%.
Yeah. Or even again, we've sort of favorably compared the Islamic approach of allowing Jews and Christians to continue to practice their faith, even the Islamic Sharia approach of, Christians and Jews, just kind of leave them alone, would have been pretty unthinkably restrictive, especially to early Mongols. It's like, why do you give a shit?
Yeah.
They have money. You have things they want. What are we doing here?
Yes, and there's loads of Muslims in the administration and the
Yes.
higher ranking levels of the Mongol state as well, even before they become more Islamicized at the top levels.
Yeah.
Man, call me a Tengrist with the way that I'm worshiping this big blue sky that I can see but fractions
For
of.
context, for those of you who don't live in the UK, it has been the wettest start to a year, I think, on record.
And what does wet mean? It means gray.
I remember during the alcohol episode,
All of our
I referred
episodes
to
are the alcohol episode.
no, the mainly alcohol episode. I was like, yes, dry January is over, wet February has arrived. Can I just say I'm sorry? I
Yeah.
feel like I did this.
But it's I can see more through the crack in the curtains of this room. I can see more blue than white or gray, and that despite the fact that we are sitting inside with the curtains drawn on one of the only sunny days of the year thus far, I feel so bolstered.
Bolstered by Tengri. Me too. I feel
Yeah.
great.
Thank you, Tengri. Thank you, Great Blue Sky.
So I think the ultimate answer to why don't the Mongols kind of leave us with the kind of things that we expect an imperial legacy to look like is because that's not how their society ever operated, that's not how they were really interested in running their society in the first place. The Mongol Empire was about the circulation and distribution of resources through the sort of the heartbeat, as it were, the capillary action of international trade. And that is what they wanted to encourage. Not building great palaces to their own kind of, like, munificence.
Yeah, and, lest we imply that the Mongols were sort of self-conscious and self-aware of their place in history enough to say, great palace? No, I don't think so. When you think about...
No, they loved great palaces.
They loved great palace, but when you think about why we have these massive edifices left in Europe and, places in the Middle East, it is because of a more sedentary type of culture and lifestyle that places an emphasis on these stable institutions and on, the institutions especially as being like separate from society. Like you have the royalty, the aristocracy, and they don't tread on the same ground as the regular people. You have the church, and they are, completely separate from the laws and the ways of, the mortal earthly worlds. And we have power vested in them as like signs of their legitimacy, and mass amounts of money vested in them as signs of their legitimacy. And they're building these structures to remind people of their legitimacy. But,
Yeah, when you made the point about palaces, I did want to just emphasize the Mongols might not have been that interested in big palace, but they were interested in big yurt.
Yes, exactly.
They wanted to have they did not want to live in the Mongol Khans didn't want to live in a big palace. They wanted to live in a tent that you could fit 1,000 people into.
Well, and they did still have some palaces.
Yes.
It's just that in a society that is not urbanized, then actually, as Marco Polo said, a huge sign of, in this vast, like, sparsely populated steppe area, these plains, a huge sign of status and power is being able to command this degree of mobility and this amount of, flow of information itself. So that is, the symbol of power.
Okay, so that's what the Mongols didn't do and why they didn't do it. It's about time we talked about what they did. What did to paraphrase, Monty Python, what did the Mongols Empire ever do for us? I mean, first thing it did is it made us all Persian.
Yeah.
So again, there's this idea of the Pax Mongolica, the peace of Eurasia. one of the things that it does is it creates a greater level of cultural kind of exchange and communication between basically all of the different kind of cultural zones of the Mongol Empire. So Christian Eastern Europe, the Middle East, and especially Persia and China, and that cultural kind of communication is heading in every conceivable direction. Everybody's influencing everybody else, and I think there's to zero in on this. I think there's a really interesting. It's really interesting to just look at the relationship primarily between China and Persia, because they are influencing each other enormously. So Persia, this is another bit of really important context. Persian culture is, in medieval Islamic culture, is a high status culture. It is kind of like it's kind of like the role of French in sort of Western European, Christian Western Europe.
Yes, it's extremely similar. It's
Yes.
a literary language, and it's a high-status language.
If you're an elite, no matter what your kind of ethnic background is, it is expected that you should speak Persian and that you should engage with Persian culture. And one of the influences that this Persianization has on the rest of the world is, okay, everybody in the audience, and Olivia, put your hand up if you have seen Chinese ceramics before. And what do Chinese ceramics usually look like?
They have blue painting on a white background.
Yeah, so they get that from that's Persian.
There you go.
That blue and white ceramic style, which is, we think of it like, a Ming Dynasty vase, even though, Ming Dynasty is
We think
post.
of my expensive Ming Dynasty vase.
No, nobody drop it. But like,
My expensive Yuan Dynasty vase.
and also, by the way, same in Japan. So because the Japanese get this from the Chinese.
Yes.
Because Chinese culture is a high status culture in Eastern Asia, like.
And the art style as
Yes.
well.
Yes, the art style is a two-way communication. So one of the most recognizable sort of forms of representational Islamic art, because again, representational art in Islam is already pretty contentious, and not all Islamic societies have been crazy about it in the past, because the sort of Islamic jurisprudence in the past has been you're generally not supposed to do that, but lo and behold, people do, because they find it interesting and compelling, because it's interesting to look at people and things.
Yep.
But and it's also a great way to tell stories. But Persian miniature painting, which is then kind of picked up and spreads across the Islamic world, particularly in the Ottoman period, is a hugely influential style in the Islamic world. And it has it's very hard to describe, but if you've seen it, it has a very distinctive, very stylized style.
Yes, and I've posted pieces of artwork from Persia, from India, from Turkey, from all over the place, on my various social media accounts before, and people always say, "Oh, this looks Chinese," or
Yeah.
"This looks."
Well,
and
there's a
because
reason
it
for
was
that.
Yeah, it was a cosmopolitan art style.
They
and
were
it is,
deliberately. The reason why it looks like that is because they are deliberately evoking Chinese images that they have seen.
Yes.
And there's a great book. Somebody out there, leave a comment if you've read this. The Orhan Pamuk novel, My Name is Red, which is all about Ottoman miniaturists.
Because that's the word miniature means red.
Yes. But in that book, the main contest and conflict in that book is between the emergent realist style of painting that's entering the Islamic world from Europe, because Europe, the Renaissance has been happening, and the traditional mode of expression, which is very self-consciously modeled after Chinese models. That's a fictional depiction, but it's the basic kind of that is what happened to Islamic art. So that style comes to Western Asia and Europe from China via the Mongols, but then it has another jump that it goes on. Do you know where this is going?
No.
Because the next thing that it does is it goes to India.
Oh, right, yeah, the Mughals, yeah.
Yes, because...
because Mughal art all looked like that, too.
Yes,
Right.
because the Mughal Empire is nominally Islamic, but really very, very tolerant. dynasty in northern India that is founded by a by a sort of Turkic dynasty of Mongol extraction. And Mughal literally means Mongol, first of all.
Yeah.
But, like, the style of art that is sort of produced in the Mughal period in India is deliberately references Persian culture. In fact, they are extremely, the elite of northern India in the Mughal period are incredibly Persianized because, again, in an Islamic context, Persian is the classiest thing you can be.
Yes.
Thanks to people like Rumi and so on. Mm-hmm. But, like, so we've gone on this gigantic journey all the way across Asia, and we've arrived at, the style of art that is sort of seen as the traditional, like now, especially to Westerners, is seen as the traditional style of Indian art, is the Mughal style, which is itself inherited from the Persians who get it from the Mongols.
Yes.
Incredible. I mean, like, what an amazing story of cultural transmission over, like, 3 centuries.
Yes, because we spoke of the Mongols not imposing their culture upon others, but, this is because there already was a prestige culture present, and, you'd be pretty hard-pressed to fight off Persian as the prestige culture.
It's pretty sick.
The Muslim Middle Ages.
Persian culture, because Persian culture is cool.
Yeah, exactly.
They're doing interesting things.
And because, that's the Khans were interested in adopting, not adopting, but they were interested in being part of this Persian prestige culture. They all spoke Persian, they all were very conscious of this presence of Persian prestige. And so that was not intentionally alliteratory, but you know what I mean.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is that the tastes of the Mongol Khans and the Mongol elite as a whole is very cosmopolitan, very, dare I say it, globalized. They just want cool shit. They want to be the patrons of the arts as well. They want to foster all these different styles because it increases the prestige of their empire. I've let this to last because it is completely speculative. It's basically impossible to prove. But I do sincerely believe that the Mongols are responsible for the spread of dumplings as, like, a central part of cuisine in basically all of their territories. Because you look at, there is the dumpling zone that goes from Poland to Japan in pretty much a straight line. Everybody along the way has some kind of filled boiled dumpling that's central to the national cuisine.
And ravioli aren't dumpling. Don't piss me off.
Well, yeah, there's a whole other conversation about, like, do the Italians get, like, pasta like from the Mongols because noodles?
No, obviously not. Don't piss me off.
Well, there's a lot. Well, also just, like, pasta's not noodles.
No.
Most pasta isn't noodles.
It's not. No, pasta is dumpling, if anything.
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
The Mongols don't just oversee a huge amount of cultural exchange. They also oversee technological changes, and probably the biggest technological change that they sort of facilitate, that is maybe in the long run will end up being the greatest technological change of the entire Middle Ages, is the introduction of gunpowder to the medieval sort of West, so the medieval, Europe and the Middle East. So Chinese have had gunpowder for yonks. They've had it since at least, like, the 9th century, almost certainly earlier. They've probably been using it in firearms since the 13th century, again, at the absolute latest. That's when we have actual documentary evidence for it. It might be as early as the 8th century as well. And the Mongol Empire absolutely adopts explosives and cannons into their military arsenal. And we have accounts of Mongol besiegers throwing what, European and Islamic sort of observers initially think is actually Greek fire and using it in battles. So there is, last episode we talked about the Mongol sieges of the assassin castles, and there's a great aside where Giovanni, who's the Persian chronicler from the last episode, talks about essentially the Mongols set up, when they were besieging one of the assassin castles, they set up this enormous ballista outside of the castle that had like fireworks filled with incendiary gunpowder, and fired them at the castle that then basically burned a lot of people to death. So the Mongols are already using it for war, and the first non-Mongols who start adopting it are the Persians, probably, and Persian and Arabic texts very explicitly recognize that this is something that has come from China, and therefore from the Mongols, because they call salt pepper Chinese snow or Chinese salt.
Do you mean saltpeter?
Yeah, sorry, yes. What did I say?
Salt pepper.
Yes, salt and pepper. I'm looking at prawn crackers again. So they call saltpeter Chinese snow or Chinese salt. Like, they know where it's from. Somebody's probably told them where it's from, and they want more of it. And of course, how do you even quantify the impact of the introduction of gunpowder on the development of Europe and the Middle East? It's basically changes the entire course of human history, because once they get their hands on it, Muslims and European Christians start enthusiastically innovating on it, refining it as a weapon, in many ways that the Chinese don't. There are various theories as to why this is. Some people, and the view that I have come to, that I think is, some people do agree with, is that basically Europeans and Christians were all just fighting themselves and also each other so much more than the Chinese were. And so there was this kind of more of an arms race, whereas China, China has wars, China has civil wars, but China has a level of political stability that is basically unthinkable in Europe, despite the fact that it is covering a similarly enormous area and a similarly enormous number of people.
I don't know enough about 14th, 15th century China to make any statement on that.
Here,
sounds about right.
Let me, counter, or not counter. Let me give you an example. There's a country called China, and then in Europe and the Middle East, there are about 70 countries. And yes, China splits and kind of reforms at various points over the following 1,000 years, but the level of political fragmentation in Europe and the Middle East is so much greater.
Yeah, like I said, don't know enough. I don't know enough about China to say anything.
Okay, so another thing that the Mongols do, they invent being Russian. So we've talked about the Rus before. Last time we heard of the Rus, they were a collection of sort of like Scandinavian trading ports that were sort of scattered across the various great rivers of Eastern Europe. When we pick up the Kievan Rus in the 13th, 14th century, they have kind of evolved into this sort of like loose patchwork of sort of a confederation of principalities who are led by a grand prince. The capital has moved from Kiev to Vladimir, but it's still like, it's still recognizably this kind of same loose confederation model. It's just like, it looks a bit like Italy in a lot of ways. And the princes of the Rus, they would rotate which lineage and which city got to hold the grand princeship. So of the cities of the Rus, the most important were Novgorod, which is a merchant republic in the far north. It is, I like to think of it as essentially cold Venice or cold Florence. Kiev, which is the sort of historic capital, and Vladimir, which is sort of further to the east. Olivia, question to you. What city have I not said? That if you literally even thought about the modern day country of Russia for even a second, you've heard of.
I don't know. There's a lot of cities in Russia.
What's the main one?
Moscow.
Yeah, Moscow's a dump. When the Mongols
It's not
show
that
up.
close to there, is it?
Well, it's in Moscow is further east, but it's very much in the kind of the cultural sphere of the.
But it's quite
of the
peripheral,
Rus.
isn't it?
It's peripheral in every sense of the word. It's further east. It's also, again, in the 12th century, it kind of emerges in the historical narrative. The Muscovites are there, but again, it's compared to the great kind of powers of Novgorod or Kiev. It is a bit of a one-horse town.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. Can't argue with that.
So the Golden Horde invades the Rus in the late 1230s, and the princes of Russia, because they are just this sort of like ragtag group of city-states, basically fail to coordinate a response, again in part because, like every other sedentary society, the Mongols are invading at exactly the period when they need their men to be back for harvest. In any case, the Mongols, they besiege and they sack Kiev and Vladimir. So again, two of the most important cities historically in the world of the Rus. And they bring all of the Rus under Mongol dominion as a tributary state. So there is still a Grand Prince, and nominally the Rus still choose them. But in reality, the Grand Prince serves at the discretion of the Mongol Khan. So the destruction of these traditional centers of power, because again, Kiev is still a place, Vladimir is still a place, but they have been greatly diminished, paves the way for the ascension of Muscovy. And so by the 13th century, or so the mid-13th century, the two most powerful cities in the region are Muscovy and Tver, which is further to the south. And there's in the 1310s, there's this interminable conflict between Muscovy and Tver, basically just constant sort of maneuvering and dynastic wrangling, that leads to the Grand Prince Mikhail of Tver failing to deliver tribute payments from Novgorod because the Novgorodites basically tell him to go fuck himself.
Oh, I hate that. I hate it when that happens.
And so Ozbeg Khan withdraws his support for Mikhail and gives the office to Prince Yuri of Muscovy, and Mikhail ends up getting put on trial and executed for, crimes against the taxman, basically.
Vaxxed?
No, this one is very explainable.
Crimes against the vax man?
The Mongols killed him. So in 1327, Tver revolts against Mongol rule, and the Khan sends an army, actually led by the Prince of Muscovy, to crush the revolt. And this tips the balance of power finally, firmly, and kind of irrevocably towards Muscovy being the dominant power amongst the various city-states of the Rus. And it is so important to emphasize that if you know anything about later Russian historiography, that you remember that in the real world, the princes of Muscovy ascend to their dominant position by an explicitly collaborationist approach to dealing with the Mongol occupiers. And the reason why I want to make that so agonizingly clear is because I mentioned at the start, I put a pin in the idea of one of the things about a culture, an empire's cultural legacy is that it's a reference point for legitimacy. I now want to remove that pin and point out the fact that later Russian historiography, like modern Russian historiography, makes great hay out of the concept of the Tatar yoke, right? Tatar, in this context, the Tatars are a different Turkic group who get are aligned with the Mongols at various points, but Tatar generally gets used in Europe as shorthand for Mongol. And yoke means a yoke that you use for farming, so it means Mongol dominion.
Yeah, it means what you hook an ox to make it plow. So,
yes. The
yeah.
Mongols are telling us to do stuff.
It's a symbol of control. Subjugate is literally Latin for under the yoke.
And in the as the Mongol Empire is sort of disintegrating in the 14th, 15th centuries, the Muscovites are sort of position themselves as leading the resistance to Mongol oppression, and I put that in the biggest scare quotes I can possibly imagine. Sort of exemplified by an event called the Stand on the River Ugra, where a Muscovite army faces off but does not actually fight a Mongol army that then leaves. And the future kind of princes of Muscovy, who will become the sort of the kings and then the czars of the Russians, who are trace their sort of lineage back to these early Muscovite princes, make so much hay out of the fact that they led the resistance. It's like, no, you were the guy that you were the guys that explicitly supported the Mongols, enforced Mongol sort of rules, and made off like bandits in the process. And that event of the Stand on the River Ugra and the sort of the subsequent the sort of consolidation of Muscovite rule over what is now the territory of European Russia cannot be emphasized enough how foundational that is to how the modern Russian state understands itself, and Russian states down through the centuries have understood themselves. And one of the examples of that is that at various points in 19th, 20th centuries, various Russian dissidents have sort of blamed the seemingly persistent like autocracy of Russia in its various kind of forms, including the Soviet Union, on the legacy of the Tatar yoke and the idea that the Muscovites were uniquely and particularly autocratic, and that's why Russia ended up with an autocratic czarist government, because the Mongols put the Muscovites in power. And if we'd simply had the good people of the Democratic Republic of Novgorod in charge, then Russia could have turned out completely differently. I am not here to validate any of those claims. I kind of think they're improvable either way, because again, it relies on so many different it relies on so many different hypotheticals, and B, it relies on a level of understanding of the internal administration of the Muscovite state that I don't have. But I'm referencing it purely to make the point that this is the one area where we can definitively say that the Mongols do have an impact on what political legitimacy is in a European state, and it is negative. And that's why nobody wants to know. That's why nobody in Eastern Europe is emulating the Mongols. And nobody's saying, I am the new Khan.
Yeah.
They're saying, I am the new Prince Dmitri.
Except the Hungarians.
Well, they have a pretty good claim to do that, given that they are. I didn't say that. No, they're a different thing.
Yeah, no, totally.
They are also steppe nomads, but
yes.
They're a different kind of steppe nomad.
No, definitely, yeah. Different type of Fingolian.
Yes. Finno-Uralic.
Yeah.
What a wonderful sentence to get to say. So that is that's the Mongols in Russia. They invent Russia as we now understand it.
Yeah.
And then eventually they moved the capital to St. Petersburg. But don't worry, they moved it back.
Worse.
I think for both.
We got Pussy Riot.
Pussy Riot and Pushkin.
Yeah.
In exchange, gestures at current state of world.
Tchaikovsky?
Yeah.
Was he Russian? Yeah.
Yeah.
He was a little funny guy.
If you have any sort of like composers or novelists who you're not 100% sure how to spell their name, they're probably
the
Russian.
Novelist Dostoevsky.
Yes.
We got the Dostoevsky Wishbone episode.
Oh, speaking of dogs, there's no other place to put this in, so I want to talk about it.
They didn't have dogs at the Mongols.
No, they did.
They didn't have dogs.
They had so many dogs.
They didn't have heckin' pupperinos.
They had so many heckin' pupperinos.
Sorry.
And here's how we know this.
Oh, God.
So, in Mongolian, the word dog was used to refer not only to literal dogs, but also to your dogs.
What up, dog?
Yeah. It meant like my guys. So it was entirely like you could directly translate the sentence "What up, big dog?" into Mongolian. They'd be like, "Yes, I understand. I understand not only the point that you're making, but also the exact tone in which you're making it."
Yep, and they have a really nice type of dog that's like the land race. We were talking about land
Yes.
races, I think, over dinner the other day. Just like the kind of default type of creature, domesticated creature that comes to exist. And yeah, they've got a big shaggy type of like black and like golden dog called the Bankar, I believe.
Since we're just talking about cultural ephemera that didn't fit into the rest of the episode, have you seen the photo shoot that Joe Biden did when he was vice president? He went to Mongolia.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really good.
It's like this is like seeing Marco Polo in the flesh.
Yeah, it really
he shoots
is.
a big bow.
Yeah.
he looks like he's about to wrestle a guy at one point. Oh, it's great. Go look that up. The last kind of cultural legacy that often gets kind of appended to the Mongol Empire, and this is probably, of all of the cultural trends that we've talked about, this is probably the biggest one, and also the hardest one to definitively pin on the Mongols, is the Black Death. So there is a story that gets often repeated in kind of in like high school level accounts of medieval history and the Black Death, which is that the Mongols are essential in spreading the Black Death, and there is a very specific story about this. So in 1343, the Khan of the Golden Horde sends his army to lay siege to the Genoese port of Kaffa in Crimea. Now remember, Kaffa was literally set up with Mongol approval as a special Genoese trade zone, but there were constant, like, as with everything in Mongol sort of imperial history, it's the Phantom Menace. This is a blockade about trade disputes. Purportedly, during the siege, the Mongol soldiers besieging Kaffa start dying of some mysterious illness. And the Mongols who are left start catapulting the corpses over the walls into the city as a way to spread the infections. The story then goes that once the siege is lifted, Genoese shipwrecks then carry the plague all over Europe because, you know, Genoa is the heart of an enormous trade network all over the Mediterranean. So this is a popular story. It's also probably partly true. So the siege of Kaffa did happen in 1343. Kaffa probably was also an important spreading point for the disease. And we do know, well, we don't know because it's basically impossible to definitively say this, but it's almost certain that the disease that probably spread the Black Death, Yersinia pestis, the strain of it that caused the Black Death probably originated somewhere in the Central Asian steppe. I've seen some recent research that says somewhere in Kyrgyzstan. I feel like we're never going to get anything that definitive, no matter how good genetic technology gets. But the actual story of the Mongols catapulting corpses is harder to verify. There are no accounts of it that are firsthand. And also, there's a question of if the Mongols know enough about disease to know that the corpses are going to carry the disease, why are they handling it? It's not saying it didn't happen, but just, like, take that all with a grain of salt. And also, Kaffa if the disease is coming from somewhere in Central Asia, which again we're pretty confident that it is, it's probably not only coming from Kaffa because there are so many different entry points that it could have into Europe. So the question is, did the Mongol Empire cause the Black Death? I think case for the defense on the Mongol Empire, right? Yersinia pestis, the bubonic plague, this was not the first time that it had emerged. So it arrives and it just it decimates the Byzantine Empire during the reign of Justinian. For example, and that is, you may have noticed, about 600 years before Genghis Khan is even like a glint in the horse milkman's eye. Sorry, I've used that joke twice in 2 episodes
Wow.
now. And then it reemerges but it reemerges in the 14th century as in this mutated form. The Mongols also aren't responsible for the lethality or the virality of this version of the Black Death. That's purely genetic mutation. And so I think I like the way that you put it, Olivia, which is that when we were talking about this off air, which is that once it got to Europe, the Black Death was always going to do what it was going to do.
Yes.
That being said, so that's the case for the defense. Mongols innocent. Mongol Empire innocent. The case for the prosecution, I think, is more. I was about to say ambivalent.
Ambivalent.
It's more ambivalent. I think what the Mongol Empire definitively did do is make travel through Central Asia easier for a lot of people. It also led to a lot of biomes and interacting that wouldn't have interacted otherwise. It also led, the disease Yersinia pestis, the way that it does the species jump from rodents, which is where it originates, to humans is via fleas. Lots more human animal contact is happening in Central Asia around this time. Lots more different species are interacting with each other, and things are moving around a lot more. There's also more environmental kind of disruption, as things as basic as the soil is being disrupted by the sheer movement of people. But what you are missing there in all of that is a smoking gun. And that is because we do not have access to what was the actual species jump. We don't have a great chronology. Before it arrives in Europe, we have a very poor chronology of how the Black Death spreads. Once it gets to Europe, it's very, very well documented. But in its Asian phase, it's kind of just... It emerges and it's decimating places, but it's hard to kind of work out a chain of spread.
Yes, and, the label Black Death assumes a single origin and a single strain, which is something that itself is quite contested.
Well, we're assuming that it is Yersinia pestis, which is the consensus, but is not really that easy to prove.
I think the archaeology has shown Yersinia pestis in basically everywhere where the plague was recorded. But there's so much disease even now. And even now, it's so difficult to understand how diseases spread, the risk factors, what makes them more contagious, a certain disease more contagious than others, especially with a bacterial infection, which the Black Death was. It's just so hard to know. I mean, for ages, the conventional explanation was that it came on rat fleas, and there's been loads and loads and loads of modeling that's been done that said that actually this is not realistic because it was spreading so quickly that it couldn't have just been close contact with rats. It must have
there has to have been some kind of mutation, something.
Well, yeah, mutation. When though? Because it's possible that we have evidence of Yersinia pestis now in rat fleas, but we don't know if it was on rat fleas then. We don't know if it was on human fleas or human lice, right? The lifespan of a bacterium is so short that a mutation can happen so quickly. I mean, they're always mutating. And when we say, and we're lucky to be able to have even identified a pathogen that was involved in this. Sorry, I'm going on a tangent now.
No, go for it.
I used to work in epidemiology. And yeah, these things are just very, very, very hard to prove 600 years after the fact. So yeah, the rat model was developed to account for spread in India, I think. But again, we just don't have the archaeology to really support a specific vector of transmission, a specific place where it became particularly sort of pathogenic. Yeah, there's just so little we understand about it. But it was clearly just, absolutely devastating.
Yeah, I think what we can say is it probably emerges in the Mongol Empire, and it's probably Yersinia, a version of Yersinia pestis, but everything else is kind of guesswork. What I think is a bit easier to say is the impact that the Black Death has on these foundations of Mongol power that we've been talking about at this point. So again, remember, Mongol power is it's about movement, right? I described it earlier as the capillary action of trade, which is keeping everything flowing. And what is one of the worst things that can happen for trade at any level is a pandemic, because you're not supposed to fucking meet new people or interact with people really at all.
Yeah.
That's how you stop it.
And even this, I think is somewhat debated, because I think it is somewhat evident that, like, by the 1340s, this sort of what we call the Silk Road had ceased to be, like, well-traveled at all and was not regarded as being particularly safe.
Well, there are multiple Silk Roads. This is crucial.
No, I know.
Particularly the Southern Silk Road, yeah.
But yes, the roads, specifically through Mongol areas. I mean, like, in general, overland travel between Europe and the Far East was much interrupted.
And sorry, go ahead.
So, our sort of most reliable reports of the Black Death come from Crimea, when, that's really even the first time when we can say this is the same strain of pathogen that infected Europe, even though we don't think it originated there. There's very poor documentation in China and Mongolia and, other Asian countries as to what actually was going on at the same time, whether people who were dying of infectious diseases were dying of, the usual ones or this new one.
Mm-hmm. And I think that the sort of the existing decline in trade tracked the fact that the Mongol Empire was drifting apart. The various kind of uluses were, in on occasion even in open war with each other. Even when they were sort of nominally still recognizing the supremacy of the Great Khan in China. But I will say that I think that if the Mongol Empire was starting to slow down and decline in the mid 14th century, I do feel like it, because of the nature of the society that it was and how dependent it was on the movement of people and goods, it realistically was not going to survive a pandemic on the scale of the Black Death. It just couldn't have.
No, probably not.
Well, yeah, asterisk that we don't have access to the counterfactual.
And we have no records of the Black Death basically in China, for instance. So we have no idea why.
Yeah.
Like, we have evidence of some population decline. We have no one who said in China, "Oh, there's a Black Death going around. I hope I don't get any plague buboes on my body."
Yeah.
So again, it's just so hard to know.
Too many
Infectious
variables.
Diseases is very complicated.
Yeah. But I think that there is, whether it was sort of caused by or helped along by the Black Death, the decline of the sort of united Mongol Empire and the sort of first the splintering of it, and then its sort of recession out of China when they get kicked out by the Red Turban Rebellion, and its recession out of Europe as they get sort of pushed out by the Russians. The decline of the Mongols tracks with a general decline in the level of, like, in this globalized trade network, and the world that for 100 years and change has been more globalized maybe than it ever has been before, starts to get smaller again. And it's not until, the Portuguese start, yucking it up in Africa and India, several centuries later, that we start to see that level of sort of international contact happening again with the sort of the European age of and I'm going to put this in huge scare quotes, so just imagine them, discovery, that obviously supercharges globalization in a way that the Mongols could have never conceived of, but probably would have been enthusiastically in favor of.
I have a good closing remark.
Yeah.
And when all of those Europeans in, subsequent centuries are embarking on their big explorations, for instance, Christopher Columbus's famous transatlantic voyage, they are thinking of and influenced by all of the people that traveled across the continents hundreds of years ago.
Yeah.
Christopher Columbus had a copy of Marco Polo's travels. He loved it.
And the other thing that the Europeans were bringing with them as they traveled to the New World or Africa, lots and lots and lots of gunpowder. Well, that is just about going to do us for another episode of the Weird Medieval Guys podcast. But don't go anywhere. Sit where you're sitting for 2 more weeks. Don't move, because there's another podcast headed on the back of this. And the reason that I said that weird thing that I just said is that we're going to record it immediately after we finish this.
That's right. When we say don't move, we're talking it to ourselves. Don't get up! Actually, we might need to go out and, stand in the sunshine.
I think we do need to do that.
Yeah, okay. But before we could ever possibly permit ourselves such a liberty, we will implore you to not only enjoy our podcast, but also to make your enjoyment known by going on Spotify or Apple or wherever you listen to podcasts. I don't know.
Send a letter through the YAM system.
Yeah, email
It'll
me.
Reach us.
I love it. People have been I've gotten a little uptick in emails recently, so thanks for that, guys. I like it when you email me.
You will never be able to email me.
You'll never be able to email Aaron, but you can,
that is not a service I provide.
You can spiritually CC him by saying "Dear Olivia and Aaron" in the email, and I will send a screenshot of it to him. Unless you don't put "Dear Olivia and Aaron," if you just address it to me, his eyes will never see it. It will be our secret. Anyways, and if you particularly enjoy our podcast, you could leave a comment on Spotify. I feel like a bit of a hypocrite, actually, because I just canceled my Spotify subscription. So I feel bad telling you to go on Spotify. But if you would like to, you can go and leave a comment. In fact, you can still listen to podcasts if you don't have a Spotify subscription.
Yeah, and also this is the difference is that this is a transparent bid for us to increase engagement with the podcast because it's good for metrics.
Yes, we want metrics.
We're doing calls to action to increase audience engagement,
yes.
And I feel so disgusting even saying that. Oh,
that's okay. I mean, engagement is one of our KPIs for this quarter. So.
Oh. No, we don't have KPIs. This whole operation runs out of a bin.
We have KPIs. We have con performance indicators.
If he starts clapping, then that's good.
Exactly. If he gives us a new yurt.
More horses. But sir, I can't ride.
Huzzah.
Then you could milk them.
Mongols x Vikings. Someone write a Genghis Khan x Eric the Red fan fiction.
Yes. Well, they love to party. They love traveling great distances, and they love being clad in furs.
Yes.
And committing heinous acts of violence,
yes.
which we didn't really talk about in this episode.
That's cool, though.
But you knew about that.
Everybody. No one's perfect.
Everybody, that weird zombie stat that everybody descended from Genghis Khan.
Yeah, it's true. Anyways. And if you leave us a comment, we may read it out loud on our podcast, such as these comments.
Look at her desperately fighting to give herself some more time.
Well, I'm finding the comment that I want to read out. OG listener, thanks to Kit for saying, OG listener, also cool Gustav Klimt. I think that's Judith, profile picture. OG listener, first time commenter here. Hey Kit, I just want to say thank you for your long episodes. Hell yes.
That's right, because we got negative feedback about that in the past from my family.
What?
They're like, why are these so long?
Oh, well, Kit, you're just gonna make them longer, so be careful what you say.
Yeah.
You two have kept me company on long walks and during menial jobs. Yay. Weird Medieval Guys has kept me from feeling lonely on a solo trip I was really nervous for. Also, like Olivia, I am guy number 3. Heck yeah.
What?
That's, I think, from the alcohol one. I think guy number 3 was maybe the licentious, libidinous one, or was that the hungry horse?
I think that might have been the hungry horse.
It might have been the hungry horse, actually.
You know what the Mongols had a lot of?
Hungry horses.
Yes.
Yes. Oh my god, yeah, just like absolutely quaffing some fermented mare's milk and like going out in the fields with your horse, just like both scranning.
Can you imagine? No, okay. Can you imagine how sick it would be to be hanging out with your dogs on the steppe, and just like you have too much milk and you just end up sort of stumbling out of the yurt, and the sun is setting over the mountains, and you just sit down in the grass and you just think, you know what? I don't want to live in a city.
Well, Kit, I'm glad that your solo trip went well. Solo traveling is a lot of fun. It can also be quite trying. And
oh my god,
if you
yeah.
listen to our next podcast episode, you'll learn about some solo trips that real medieval guys went on.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you finished this solo trip before we released that episode, because you might find it a bit traumatizing.
All right, with that in mind, let's go get some sun on our faces very briefly, and then we'll be back.
Don't worry, Tengri, I'm coming.
Big, beautiful blue sky.
Until next time, take it easy.
Abash.